Every time I think C.J. Moore of The Athletic can't write another great article, which there's nothing wrong with writing a bunch of them because he has, but every time I'm like, okay, that's about as good as it can get, he does another one. And the one that came out, Baylor's Adam Flagler, and a deliberate decision paying off in a large way, I read it. Then I read it again. C.J. Moore from The Athletic joins us on 365 Sports on the eve of Baylor, Kansas tomorrow afternoon in Lawrence. And, C.J., last time we had you on, you said you were working on, like, multiple stories, whether it was Jonathan Chachua or whoever else, and this one was brilliant. What was the one thing you learned out of a lot of things that you learned about Flagler coming to Baylor or at Baylor that you perhaps, like, really stuck out to you the most?
Well, just sitting down with him and interviewing him, I was struck by his maturity, and I tweeted this out earlier. I told him at the end, I was like, "You're like kind of wise beyond your years. It's like talking to an older guy, And he said, I've kind of been like that way his whole life, and so I think that's one thing that really struck me. Like I knew he was from being around the program a little bit, I knew he was a good guy, and but he's so thoughtful, and I think, my favorite part of the story is probably him, John Jacobs sitting in his living room and having a 5-hour in-home visit, which is pretty wild to think about it. One coach sitting down with a family for 5 hours and going through film and going through, their stories. And I thought that was pretty neat. And I think that connection is a big reason why he got to Baylor. And I think that connection is a big reason why he has succeeded. I think this coaching staff has found a way to connect with these young men. And, it was important with Davion and Jared and Maceo, and it's kind of continued with the next crop.
CJ, that string of guys you just mentioned were notoriously hard workers, and so much so that, particularly with Davion, they had to trick him to go home sometimes because he would just work and work and work. Adam Flagler's kind of continued in that tradition. What is it about their ability to find guys who they can identify early on that want to follow in that, like Flagler was with those other guys?
Sorry, I was trying to talk. You said how they've been able to find guys like that?
Yeah.
I think part of it is doing your research in the back in the front end and when you're looking for guys. But I also think you get a culture where when guys show up, they see how hard everybody else is working, and they just kind of fall in line. Like if Davion Mitchell is your best player, and he's working that hard, like who am I to not try to match him? So I think these programs, once they get it rolling, sometimes it's just it kind of feeds itself. And I think Adam always had that in him, but I'm sure it didn't hurt that when he got to Baylor, he saw what it was like with everybody else. And Scott's done a really, really smart thing, and it's one thing I didn't hit in on this story, but John Jacobs mentioned it to me is he's got a GA that works with him, and Scott hires a ton of GAs. I don't even know how many they have right now, but it makes it so that these guys always have somebody to rebound for them, to train them outside of practice. And I think that's one of their the secret sauce, part of the secret sauce. And Jerome Tank's trying to do that at K-State. He has a similar model. He's trying to hire as many GAs as he can.
I tell you what, I thought it was funny. I cracked up on the story when Adam came to town for a recruiting visit, and he walks in. He's going to, they wanted to work him out a little bit, and all of a sudden there's Maceo Teague, Davion Mitchell, and Jared Butler lacing up the tennis shoes, right? And it's like, oh, really? And we've heard of those stories before about testing those who are coming in. I thought that was great. In the point guard part of it, CJ, I don't think there's any question. Last year there were questions about, do they have a true point guard? And this year, did they, was that going to be an Achilles? And at times they've kind of had to go through that. He wanted it, he got it, and it seems like it's starting to pay off.
Yeah, and I had kind of questions on what they were going to do in the off season, and every time I asked, I remember talking to the coaches during the offseason. They always said it was going to be Adam. They kept their promise to him, and he's done a tremendous job, and I think grown in that position and really, really, improved as the years progressed.
What do you think about the balance between the three guards, especially the last couple of weeks when they've been red hot of, that none of them have been cold at the same time. They kind of seem to give and take from each other. Does that start with him?
Yeah, I think probably so. He is, nobody would fault him for wanting to take 15, 20 shots a game, right? Like he's probably earned that right. But I thought the West Virginia game was a great example where, he's coming off that TCU game where he was on one, right? And so you come out in the next game, you're probably wanting to get enough shots. He only shoots three shots in the first half. And I thought watching that game early on, like they looked about as bad as they could look, right? Like West Virginia's ball screen coverage, trapping the ball screens. They gave them a little trouble early on. But I thought like the second half of that game was some of the most beautiful basketball you're going to see. And the ball was really humming. And John gives them another element of that, of a guy who can dribble, pass, and shoot. And, when he's out there on the floor and he got 5 guys that can dribble, pass, and shoot, I think this offense is only going to get better because, when that thing's moving and you've got so many guys that are threats, that's when you get really, really hard to guard. And that's always when I thought Davion and Jared and Maceo were at their best, not when they were just necessarily attacking mismatches and doing isolation stuff. I thought when they were playing off each other and the ball was zinging around, that's when they got really, really dangerous. And I think you saw some of that against West Virginia. Hopefully they can keep that up because it's fun to watch.
They started doing that outside weave again. Not that they don't do other things, but I remember with Davion, Jared, and then even Maceo and then Flagler was a part of it. When they started running that, for a couple of years when they were not losing at all, man, it's almost like it's a cobra, like kind of like trying to hypnotize a cobra, isn't it?
Yeah. You're just worried when is it going to strike, and when you've got 3 guys that are that dangerous, and anyone can hit you at any time, that's really, really, really hard to guard. And there's a reason why they're the best offense in college basketball when you look at the analytics.
You mentioned Jacobs in that 5-hour meeting, and then, of course, you also in that article mentioned what Flagler wanted to be, a pediatrician, and now he wants to be a doctor, and what he's doing to follow people around who are in that profession. How much that story about what Jacobs told Adam about his son who has autism, and how much that struck Adam, and that conversation went to that more than it went to anything basketball?
Yeah, I just think it shows he's a thoughtful young man. And he was already an adult when Jacobs entered that room. His dad told me that he told the coaching staff that, hey, he's a really good basketball player, but wait till you meet him. And some parents are going to be a little biased, but I think that it was totally accurate. Like, not only was they were getting a really good basketball player, but they were going to get a really good young man too.
Well, tomorrow it's Kansas. It's in Lawrence. Baylor pretty much controlled 90% of that game the last time around, but both teams have been playing better in stretches since then. How do you see this one shaking out tomorrow?
Man, I think it's going to be another great game. This is becoming such a fun matchup year in and year out. It seems like the first one, one team kind of has something figured out and kind of not necessarily tricks the other, but has an adjustment that maybe the other team didn't see coming. And then in the second game, the other team kind of figures it out and has something new for the team that won the first one. So I'm sure Bill Self's gonna come up with something tricky to throw at Baylor. And I wrote about this after they played last time, just the chess match of these two teams and the coaching staff going at each other. It'll be a fun one to watch, and that atmosphere in Allen, like you said, KU's playing better lately too, and Baylor's been tremendous. I think it's going to be one of the best atmospheres you're going to see in college basketball this year. That building will be rocking, I know.
Here's a note, not sure what it matters until they play tomorrow, but a lot of these teams at the top of the Big 12 have played and have winning records against the top 25, and even a lot of them, not a lot of games against the top 10, but for example, Iowa State's 4-1. They have more top 25 wins than anybody in the country. Baylor is 2-1 in the top 10. Texas 3-2, but Kansas has not lost to somebody inside the top 10. They're 4-0, and Baylor is a top 10 team that game tomorrow afternoon in Lawrence. CJ, thank you very much. Are you putting together a piece on Jonathan? Is that coming around the corner?
I already did one on John.
Yeah, I didn't know if you're going to do an update on him now that he actually has played.
Oh, no, I mean, I wrote one right after he played his
first game back. Okay. I must have missed that one. Okay, good. All right.
Go find, there's a podcast up today, too. I just tweeted it out a little bit ago.
All right.
Talking about the reporting of that story. So you get double the trouble there.
I will. I'll get it. Thank you, CJ. Appreciate your time. He is an absolute elite writer and has done many stories on the Big 12 and some of the great stories I've seen him write about not just Baylor, but the Big 12 and men's basketball. Tomorrow in the Big 12, Texas